For more perspective on where this goes from here, Chief Washington anchor Leland Vittert. Leland, this was a law. Congress passed it. The president signed it. 90 days, everyone's on the same page here that this was yesterday. We don't have it. Why?
Well, because the truth probably is fairly inconvenient, especially as you pointed out at the very beginning of the segment, that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is in China right now, in Beijing, met with Xi Jinping, and the Biden administration, whether you agree or disagree with their policy, is doing everything possible to appease and make up with the Chinese and try to have some kind of rapprochement with them, and dropping a report that says, oh, by the way, COVID came from a lab in Wuhan, not through the wet market, probably would not do much for Antony Blinken having a successful visit or, being all that welcome back. So the timing is critical. I think what's important, though, Congress passed the law. The president signed it. But when the president signed it, he said, I'm committed to releasing everything that does not compromise national security, which can mean just about anything. If you think just sort of in terms of what is classified and declassified, the president pretty much has unilateral right to declassify or say anything that he wants. That is a constitutional right of his. So if President Biden says, I want to come out and give a speech about the origins of COVID and lay out what we have and our evidence against the Chinese, there's nobody who could stop him. This is not a conscious decision by the intel community. At some point, since the president signed this law, the decision rests with him.
Yeah, and when I've asked the White House about this, Leland, we don't know if the president's going to come out and take a definitive stance on what he believes, right? Like, he could essentially punt this and say, look, as we heard Jim Himes say, top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, the president could say, look, the Intelligence Committee is split, and that's sort of what I believe. But I guess we don't really know until we see everything for ourselves.
Well, not only don't we know, but we don't know what level of confidence really the intel community has, because most of what we see has been or heard about are the declassified reports and based on declassified intelligence. But talking about confidence inside the intelligence community is an important thing, because the intel community tries to have a very high standard for what they say their conclusions are. More likely than not is not something that they really deal with. It's like, would you publish this on the front page of the newspaper as a conclusive fact? And the point being is you may not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, okay, that the virus came from China. At the same time, you could look at the circumstantial evidence, especially if it's true that the first 3 cases of COVID were scientists at that lab. And it is very difficult to come up with a fact pattern that is not a lab leak. And I'd put just a little bit of a hook on Joe Khalil's reporting. There may not be any indications that this was some kind of bioweapon intentionally released by the Chinese, but I think it's becoming increasingly clear that they were doing what's called gain of function research in that lab. We know that, which is making these diseases and these viruses more deadly and more contagious. And if what was reported last week is true, that the first 3 scientists in this lab got sick, ask yourself, what's more likely? They got sick because of sloppy handling of the viruses in the lab, or they got sick with a new and very deadly form of this virus that they were researching in the lab, but they didn't get sick from it in the lab. Instead, they got sick from it in a wet market where no one can trace back exactly the origins of how they got sick in the wet market, and that's where COVID began. Take your pick.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.